Okay. If you're there, come back to us. Ah, to say, it's very good to see you all. It's been a while. Okay, I hope you're ready. Here we go. So you're familiar with these locations, right? 1 through 9. That's what this represents. Locations 1 through 9. What I want to do is, because there has been some talk in the community around the later location stuff and people getting there, not getting there, potentially, all that kind of stuff. I definitely don't want to spend, hours and hours and hours going over later location stuff. That would be kind of its own program. But I do want to give you a couple of tidbits that, for those of you who are experiencing it, who do think you're experiencing it, you will find insanely helpful. And if you don't find it helpful, it's probably a good indication that if you don't look at this and you're not like, oh my God, then, and all of the implications that it brings up in your system and all of that, then it's probably a good sign that you're not experiencing it. Right? So it's pretty simple stuff, but the implications of it, if you're experiencing it, are really significant. Okay, so if we look at these different groupings, right, we've got kind of a break here between the first three and then the remaining ones here, right? And if you think about what's really happening, you have a dissolution, essentially, of separateness that's occurring. That's primarily what's occurring over the course of the entire continuum matrix, all of that. It's basically, the further you go from a location standpoint, basically, the greater the reduction in separateness. It's all about separateness. That's it. Period. End of story. It's the whole game. And so at the beginning, you've got sort of this cognitive fixation, mental and emotional type stuff, right? Thinking and all of that is a cognitive self, if you will. You can think of it that way. That is dissolving. And by location 4, once you root into location 4, not when you're first there, but after it's settled in that initial period, and layer 3 is sort of gone, and it's just layer 4 in location 4. What is happening is you're basically then really sort of locked into a sensory sense of self. What we might call a sensory fixation of perspective, right? And then from 9 on, you really start to move beyond the sensory stuff. So the sensory fixation is more or less dissolved here, or at least it's dissolving in the bridge over to 10, just like it was dissolving in the bridge over the early part of 4, same sort of idea. And, I don't want to get into this. This is a huge topic. But you can just think of it as sort of additional perceptual related fixations that relate to different chunks of this that are sort of going away and whatnot. All right, so the main thing to keep in mind about all of this is that it really truly just comes down to a reduction in the sense of separation and peeling the layers in the system that are necessary for that to occur in a deeper and deeper way. Now, that was one way to view these locations. This is a different way to view these locations. You can actually have a matrix of the locations themselves, right? And so you can even carry that up to the next rung of locations as well. And if you look at this, it's extremely indicative, right? And so you can see the gap between 3 and 4, the gap between essentially the cognitive self and the sensory self. And there's, different types of perceptual fixations and selves and stuff here. And then, this is a major jumping off point for, in a way, another cycle up the spiral this is a major jumping off point for another cycle up the spiral. You've heard me say many times, research-wise, we spent very little time on any of this because I've always been much more interested in this. This diagram can help you to sort of see why that might be. It's just a whole other level of the game, basically, right? So one way to view these is as their own, essentially sort of levels up a spiral, if you will, right? And what you can do is you can ask yourself, what is so, special or unique to this one? What is so special or unique to this one? What is so special or unique to this one? Because there's another angle to this that we'll see in a second. So if we take this one, for instance, and we call it the real, I don't care what you call it, more or less, this is just removing gross abstraction layers, and you wind up, in the present moment with the flatness and, all of that. And then you have, by the end of 9, the universe has come through your eyes. Now it's taken over your whole body or whatever. I mean, you're basically like, transcending the senses, but through this process, you're really sort of coming more into the concrete here and now sort of thing. And it's a huge jump, if you will, up to the next one, which just, again, we could call these things a lot of different things. Today, I'm just making it some quick shorthand here for us to sort of a more non-reality. This is the opposite of that. It doesn't feel concrete. It feels like everything has a potential. The best way to think about this is if you're having a dream at night and you have objects in the dream, right? In the dream, it's like, wow, I have to open the door to walk through it. Or there's this person walking by that I'm saying hi to, and they seem like a real thing and whatever else, right? But when you wake up, or if you can be lucid in the dream, right? How real is that object? How real is that person actually, right? How does that really feel in terms of a visceral experience? And the answer is it doesn't feel very concrete at all, right? It feels like anything could be kind of anything in a way. Well, that person is just made out of dream stuff, basically, right? That could have been, you could transform into a dog a minute from now, and it'll still be, dream stuff, right? And so it feels sort of like anything can be anything. That you're sort of beyond having a fixed reference point in space and time. You can fly, you can just sort of do all sorts of, these are the types of senses that come in with this experience at this next rung, basically, of locations. But it actually gets more interesting than that. And so what's common in all of this is that the system itself seeks some kind of fixed reference point. Reference points relate to this horizontal level, right? They're functional, they're relational. Generally, you can't see them. What people say when they're at a location 4 place, of course, there's no sense of self. It's inconceivable that there's any last little vestiges of sense of self left. Are you crazy? Or whatever, right? By the time you're here, sense of self looks like you are an ordinary human being. You have so much sense of self at location 4. Like, you can't believe that you were ever like, yeah, there's nothing left. It's just nothing here, right? Like you were swearing back then. And so you just can't see them. Right? So what anyone is saying at any one of these, the one thing that you can be sure is that it's completely wrong. It's missing everything about that actual experience. Because they're in the experience, they're not able to objectify the experience. It's why we have to go across so many cultures and we have to go across so much stuff to triangulate all of these different things, because there's just, you get the idea. Okay, so whoops, let me back up here. And let me see, I might be, you know what, I'm somehow missing a slide here. I don't know how that happened. Okay, so let me give you the slide that we're missing here somehow. Is this, we can take these red boxes and we can just as easily draw them this way, right? And so this is a set of locations that is all related to each other. This is a set of locations that are all related to each other. This is a set of locations that are all related to each other, right? You're starting to get a sense of that. I know from some of the research data that I've seen coming in from participants that are from this community versus other communities, not that they all say the same thing, but I know that at least people are saying it in this community, which means they're probably saying it out loud at some point in Telegram or somewhere. Facebook maybe, or who knows, whatever, calls, I don't know. But, people will get to, for instance, here, and they'll say things like, you know what? I'm not sure I was ever in fundamental well-being. I think I'm just now experiencing location one, right? And they'll get to here and they'll be like, don't tell anybody this, but I'm just now in location two. I really just had it totally wrong before. Of course, they didn't have it wrong before, for God's sakes. They were perfectly describing the locations all the way through here, right? I mean, it's not like they like, oh yeah, the universe is like, it's experiencing itself through my body now. It's all integrated in, right? It's not like, oh yeah, I'm in location two for the first time. My God, who would have guessed? I wonder what this is really like. Man, did I have location nine? I thought I was in location nine. I don't have any idea what was happening to me, right? Um, and so if you think about this, it's a little crazy, but it is the case. And so there's two things to keep in mind here. The first is these are all related to each other by some sort of underlying architecture, each one of these sets of locations. And just realize if you've been through these, if you've been through one of these, let's say you've been through 1 through 9, and you maybe started, if you are somewhere up here, and I don't believe that there's anybody that we've heard in the community so far that at least our research subjects believe have even cemented in 14 or beyond 14 or whatever. But you're far enough along, that is a very useful piece of information for you to say, okay, wait a minute. Something is common here that's underpinning this whole thing. What's common here that's underpinning this whole thing, right? This is the real. This is sort of a non-reality thing. Again, loose terms. It's not even something that necessarily is the best term for the whole thing at the moment. And then this way, right? Like, what is this harmonic, basically, between these three? What are the implications of that? If you've been to enough of these, you're going to have an aha moment as you pause to reflect on this. And it's going to be like a holy crap kind of moment for you. All right. Now, I'm not going to go any further in it than this. This is not the kind of thing you're going to spot with you as an individual or a handful of individuals talking about this or something like this. You got to have a ton of research subjects you're going across to pick out stuff like this, right? And so but seeing it, knowing it, letting it sink in to your system is going to do things, and it's going to be good things. Okay. All right. So that's our first thing here. I'm going to stop sharing that, and we're going to then go on to something different here. Sorry about the slides there. I don't know what happened with my other example. Oh, somehow it wound up as a hidden slide. That's weird. Must have just been an accidental thing. I tell you what, this is how I represent it, so I'm just going to share it again real quick. So there you go. This is what it looks like, right? And so this is just how to think about it visually with the bands going this way. Okay. All right. Let me bring up our next presentation for the other thing that we want to cover today. Okay, so jumping off from there, we can ask ourselves, what is it that finders really want? All right, so if I back up one here, we go to slide 1, right? Keeping all of this in mind, keeping in mind this key concept that the system always is seeking a fixed reference point, because it is. It needs something to stabilize the perception of reality, right? It has to have something like this is the thing that everything else is in comparison to. Because even when, no matter how many times over the course of those locations you swear that your system isn't doing that, it's still doing it, and you're just not seeing it, right? So what is it that seekers and even many finders actually want? They want an enlightened ego, right? You want to get rich as a spiritual teacher? This is what you sell. Right? People basically want to remain themselves as much as possible, right? But have all of the benefits of PNSE. And quite interestingly, that's mostly what people get. So this is not something we've ever talked about before. This is one of those things that is going to be our controversial thing for today. So we're going to hypothesize here a couple of different types of fundamental well-being, type 1 versus type 2, right? And so over here is going to be type 1, and over here is going to be type 2. So type 1 is fundamental well-being as we've always discussed it, and it's more or less fundamental well-being as you've ever heard anybody else ever discuss it or write about it or whatever else, right? This is basically what us in the West at the minimum, but even in the East for the most part, think about as what fundamental well-being is. And fundamental well-being type 2 is new for us today. So fundamental type 1 is fundamental well-being, but with the ego's underlying structures and architectures, those individual separation pieces, those core components of separation, fundamentally still largely intact. And if you think about it, this should make a lot of sense to you, right? It's fundamental well-being that focuses in certain ways that generally ignore those structures partially or fully, right? So we've talked in the past about how if you've got, layer 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, right? And location, whatever, right? What you're actually doing when you go to layer 2 is you're sort of shrinking your perception a little bit. And it's not that layer 1 isn't still out here, right? So all that stuff is still out here. It's all still happening, all that stuff. But you're not paying attention to it. It's no longer really visible to you until you get a trigger, right? And then you're sucked back out into, oh, there's layer 1. Yeah. Right. It's still there. It's still happening. You're not fundamentally dissolving anything, really, right? What you're doing is you're rehabituating your attentional processes to ignore things. And that's type 1, fundamental well-being. Type 2 fundamental well-being is something very different. It is fundamentally dismantling or destroying those underlying pieces in some way. When I said, keep in mind Karen's thought from the Q&A thing, that was an interesting example of something like that. I can't remember what she was holding, something that she was holding two opposites and she was doing. Karen, can you remind me what that was?
Yeah, pain and painless. Form
Pain
and
and
form.
painless.
Yeah. But pain particularly.
Stuff like this, right? And so these types of that type of process of taking things that are deep sort of underlying pieces of the functioning of fixation itself, we could say, right? We can call it the ego, we can call it a sense of self, we can call it identity. It's probably best to just think of it as the components that function for fixation in the system, perceptual fixation, whatever, different types of fixation in the system, right? It's instead of working up here on, spaciousness and sinking into spaciousness and whatever else, it's working down here underneath all that stuff on the support structures that are creating the possibility for any of that stuff to exist in the first place, and trying to basically, kick them out, and, knock them out and whatnot, right? Okay, so let's get into this a little more. So type 1 versus type 2, right? Type 1, again, is basically everything you've learned from us, and in terms of what supports it. So it's access, then sinking in, right? That's our core thing. Do a meditation method until it gives you some sort of access to fundamental well-being. And then what do? Once you've got a little bit of access to it, you sink into it till it goes away. Then you do the method again, get the access back, sink into it again, right? Think about what you're actually doing there. You're retraining and reprogramming your attentional system. You're dehabituating your attentional system from one thing, rehabituating your attentional system into another thing. That is a very different thing than trying to destroy and whack out underlying structures to the whole system, right? But it works. It works really, really well. And you know what doesn't work very well? Trying to teach people to whack out those underlying structures, which is why you have the entire rest of the marketplace largely failing to get people anywhere, right? And you have us at least succeeding on getting people into these places in fundamental well-being, because we're taking a completely different approach to it. Where have you ever heard sinking in before? Like, everybody that comes to us is like, how come nobody ever told me about the sinking in thing before? And the reason is very simple. It's because like 2,000 years ago, some guy had some structures probably get destroyed, right? And then he assumed, he or she, but most likely he, seems to be what passes down in the literature, right? Even though there's probably nuns that are 10 times more advanced, that just never get to write the books or whatever else in their eras, right? But that those guys were all working with, just like happens today, believe it or not, totally happens today, right? You can't, good luck finding like some leading Tibetan guy that doesn't have some leading Tibetan nun that you're never going to hear about, that they've been like collaborating with forever or whatever, right? And so, but it doesn't matter, you're never going to hear them on the web or whatever. They're going to stay in their little hermitage house, and it's just going to be like the senior guys visiting, getting the good stuff, right? And so it's this has been the way it's gone forever, right? So it's some guy wrote the stuff down, and he like, oh, this thing disappeared. Something whacked it out, right? Okay, great. We're going to have people whack. I'm going to give them my best guess for how to whack, right? And whacking stuff doesn't really work that well. So what we do very different than that is we generally focus and habituate, right? Now, the downside of this is that it weakens those underlying structures as it goes, but it does not dismantle them. It does not destroy them, typically, right? And so you wind up getting to experience fundamental well-being, but not getting to experience the type 2 type of fundamental well-being, which is extremely rare, by the way, extremely rare. So what's another aspect of this? Theory of mind, actually, is pretty important to this whole thing. Another thing that we mentioned earlier, I can't remember if it was in the Q&A or where it was, but we talked about the contagion effect, the mental contagion effect, if you will. The idea that, it's a pretty high absorption crowd in the spiritual space, generally speaking, right? And if I'm describing the grass and, oh, it smells so amazing, I can just feel the energy of the earth coming up through me and all that. People are like, oh, I feel it, all of that, right? You're sort of, I don't know, like your typical classes, and people have really figured this out from a business standpoint, like that Joe guy, whatever, superhuman guy and all of that, right? If you look at any successful program, what they're basically doing is they're completely playing to absorption. And you can get people to just feel amazing stuff, right? Even though you're not actually transitioning them. Well, what's going on there is a lot of this theory of mind and deeper, lower level stuff, and things like absorption, other stuff. And so that really supports type 1, fundamental well-being, right? If I ask you for a show of hands, probably every window is going to have the hand go up where I'm like, how many people like to watch spiritual teacher videos, right? Or how many people, it's just like this whole thing, or participate in, community chatting about all of this stuff, or what it's like crack to the system. Why is that? Because the underlying structures are still in place. What are they driven by? They're driven by dopamine hits. You're getting spiritual dopamine hits, just like other people are getting Facebook dopamine hits, right? Or, television dopamine hits or whatever else. That same structure is still there. You're still being fundamentally driven by that. Yours is being driven by this in this direction. And it's those processes. And it keeps you locked in to type 1 fundamental well-being. So what supports type 2, but more importantly, what is type 2? What is the experience of type 2? The experience of type 2 is very much akin to the experience of that we've talked a little bit about, say, at location 9, right? Where it feels like the universe is just pervading through, acting through. It's the ultimate version, basically, of a seamless interface between sort of all that is and you and your actions of this being or this whatever sort of in the world, right? And there will be a zillion times in type 1 fundamental well-being where you're like, I'm 100% there, man. Like there's nothing left here. It's just the universe acting through me. And you're still in type 1. And it's easy, so easy for us to spot from the outside, right? I don't know of anyone in our community that isn't in type 1. Right? None of our researchers that keep an eye on the people in the community and what's going on in it and all of that and track it and for our research and all of that, nobody knows of anybody that's not in type 1. Type 1 is extremely rare. You know who's not in type 1? The guy who comes out of the cave every 30 years that we get lucky to do an interview with for a little bit of time before he goes back in the cave, right? No kidding. That's who's in type 2, right? It's type 2 is an extreme. It is an extreme, to say the least, right? So, and those are true stories. Like we've been very fortunate to be at sort of right place, right time, or to get an invitation because of our research being known to fly halfway around the world to some guy who's coming out of the cave for whatever requirement with his religion to pass something down to one of his disciples. And then he's going back in the cave and he can have X amount of time. We can put some shit on his head and record some brainwaves or whatever, right? But we've been just a handful of times in a very, very fortunate situation like that. And it's very clear that type 2 is sitting right there, Okay, so what were the important components of type 2? Intense introspection, right? Which you either have a natural talent for or you work your butt off to develop, usually both. Usually you have a natural talent and you cultivate it, and it's all you cultivate, right? And so you think about a system like the Tibetan monastic system, right? Their most hardcore renunciates, they're on the lookout for the natural talent. And occasionally they find it. Occasionally someone gets to become one of their disciples and meet with them occasionally when they come out of their hermitage, right? Every X number of years. No kidding. That's the way it goes. Ability to act on those processes. What do I mean by that? I mean, Karen had a good example earlier. She basically was able to sort of detect the process, formless, whatever it is. And it's not just any process, right? I mean, it's low-level attentional processes. There's kind of a range of things that form an underpinning in a way. They're very hard to even get to, observing yourself, perceive in any sort of clean way, much less act upon them. So step 1, you've got to get the skills built up to be able to see them. Step 2, you've got to be able to try to do something about them, try to act on them in some way, try to either dismantle them or destroy them. Very different from the theory of mind side. Solitary path. Probably slightly better than a solitary path is a very small, talented number of close and serious people working together, right? They're never going to talk to other people. They're never, unless they feel like, they'll talk to us on the rare occasion, right? Because they feel like there's some advancement for humanity that might occur from whatever, but they're not talking to 2,000 people, while on their weekend out of the cave or whatever, right? And so this is a very traditionally solitary endeavor. But we have also seen it be a situation where a very small, highly talented group of people can be highly effective. And that's actually what we choose to model inside. We're in the project, most of us at the heart of this project are going for type 2. We're not interested in type 1 anymore, right? We're interested in type 2. And we're modeling this, a very small, very talented group of people working together. Why the benefit there? There is one downside to the solitary thing in that you don't get skillful reflection coming back to you. It's all on you. You have to be like the world's biggest rock star. Now, chances are you've come up through a system that has identified you as one of the world's biggest rock stars and been given every amount of preparation that you can for 20 years before you embark on this path, right? And all of that, right? And so that it's not that this isn't a successful thing, the solitary thing, it is a successful thing. It can be a very successful thing. It's not a practical thing for those of us living in the rest of the world, right? And so from our standpoint, we think that it's better to go the other route, which is a very small, talented number of close and serious others. I'm almost impossible to get to. Basically, I'm about to take a year off from that and go do this university a favor because I think there's something important to be done in the consciousness space, and I can't think of anybody else to do it. I get offers all the time, right? It's definitely not the first time I've been offered to be the president of a university or anything, but I can almost always think about some other person that could do it and should do it. And in this case, there isn't that person. And so I'm taking a year off and I'm doing it, right? But barring this particular year, it's almost impossible to reach me at this point in my life, right? I mean, you can see I'm never in the communities, right? I can't tell you the last time I read anything in Telegram. It's been a really long, long time, right? We helped to get the community started. I was posting and reading a lot back then, but at a certain point, that was it. I haven't even opened it again. And so this is why, right? It's because personally, we're going for type 2. Why? Because we really feel like it's the leading edge of this thing. We feel like it's where nature is eventually heading. In the same sense that people like Buddha were probably on the leading edge of fundamental well-being, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. We think that the current leading edge of this thing, what the universe may be really wanting to see expressed through more and experiment with more, is this sort of type 2 type of direction. However, it is completely impractical for most people, right? It's just completely impractical for most people. In our case, the small, talented number of close and serious people, they're financially independent. They have no responsibilities to family, basically. I mean, it's like the handful of us are in a very specific, very privileged situation to be able to explore this, right? And that is a vanishingly small percentage of the global population that is in that position, right? And so for the vast majority of folks, type 1 basically is where it's at. So why am I even telling you about type 2? First of all, it's because the community itself and the people in it and stuff, you're starting to progress to later and later and later locations. And people are wondering, how come there still seems to be so much ego in people in these later locations, right? And so you need an answer to that. And this is the answer. Because type 1 doesn't really do anything fundamentally from a deep ego piece structuring, component sort of structuring standpoint as it goes along. You can be in location, 18 and be really ego and have everybody looking at you being, God, that really just looks like individualized sense of self, egoic stuff. What is up with this dude? He's supposed to be so far out there, right? Or what is up with this lady? She's supposed to be so far out there. I don't understand. This is like we've been lied to about fundamental well-being. No matter how far you go, it's still you still see these same reflections coming from people and whatever else. Yeah, you do in type 1. right? Now, type 1 is a tool, right? Type 1 can be a tool to get to type 2. And to work on some of those underpinnings and to thin out some of those underpinnings and to thin out some of those ego stuff. I see a thing from Karen where she says the way I teach it in my class is type 1, I call being a better person, most skills, more community, more safety, faster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Type 2, I call being open to what is, et cetera. That's a great way to think about this first part here, at least, which is type 1, I call being a better person. Yeah, totally. You can absolutely work on those underpinnings of the ego structure associated with this stuff, right? There's a ton of reconditioning that you get access to. More importantly, you can just have a phenomenal life from type 1, right? Which, remember, that's what people are looking for. They're looking to keep their ego and get the benefits, right? What are they really saying? They want an awesome life. Well, type 1 gives you, type 2 is not an awesome life. I mean, it can be a phenomenal life, but it's like, the universe being a proctologist, it's like bend over the table for the 912th time while I get an even larger object and see what I can find around in there to remove from you, right? I mean, you got to be like, okay, let's go again, kind of thing. It's not a desirable thing for most people in their life. It's not really what they want. It's not really what they're after from a fundamental well-being standpoint, right? They're after type 1, basically. And even then, a certain limited range, really, in type 1. And look, that's perfectly fine, right? Again, we're an agnostic project. Just because we make certain decisions for ourselves, it doesn't mean we think that those are the right decisions for other people. I don't have any idea what's right for your life, right? You have to decide what's right for your own life in terms of fundamental well-being. I'm as far from being some sort of spiritual guru as you could possibly be. I have no dictates for you or your life whatsoever, right? We just try to make information available for you so that you can make whatever decisions seem best for you at any given time, at any given moment in your life, and you can change those tomorrow, and I don't care. You can screw it up. I may feel bad for you. Probably I won't care, probably, if you screw it up. I have my fingers crossed. I hope you're doing the best. I hope we're providing you with what we can provide you with, right? But you're on your own kind of to some degree with this stuff, right? I'm never going to say, this is what you should do, right? And so we're wide open with this for you. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist for us to see that for the vast majority of people, what they're really looking for is a pretty limited range in fundamental well-being. But God, what an incredible life that gives you, right? Getting to that range, being in there. I mean, you'd be insane not to want that kind of life. It's like, I mean, talk about being cheated, out of what you could have. I mean, it's just as good as it gets, right? You get to location 2, layer 3, and, charmed life type stuff and all of that. I mean, come on, you've won the lottery, right? For sure. Like, you're one of the most fortunate human beings who has ever graced this earth, by far, right? So something to consider with all of this, right? And so, Vladimir, where you were asking me earlier, how do you skip over stuff? You skip over stuff by basically cutting away the foundations, the things that are underneath all the other stuff, right? That's how you do it. And if you were to, go back, let's see if I can. Now, if you go back here and you're thinking, okay, well, how do I jump over this section? You just have to knock the right things out underneath it, A, or you've had to have had the underpinnings here already so weak that it turns out your system didn't need it and it just jumped right over it and immediately went on to the next thing, right? Now, that could have been here, that could have been here, could have been a jump from here to here, right? Could have just not needed this stuff. It works on a micro level as well as whatever else, right? This is all an uncovery and a scrubbing by the system process. That's what it is, right?
Sorry, but you kind of need to know it's there at all, that the body orientation, the sensory exchange with what seems to be outside, unless you notice it's there. How do you know it's there?
You mean to work on it or what?
Yeah, to work on it, yes. Like with the sensory orientation, I just hit by accident that, okay, I assume that this should be happening, but yeah.
The answer is you really don't need to know it's there. You don't need to understand it. If you're in the right circumstances, right, or you're working sort of a deeper, harder core type of path, you just don't need to know about it. It just becomes, it's like kicking the leg out from underneath the stool. The stool just collapses. That kind of thing. Okay. Okay, benefits versus downsides. So the benefits of type 1 are that the structures remain intact to support a more normal life, and fluidity exists and things like that. Fluidity is a type of fixation, in your local individuated sort of system. Doesn't matter how far out you go in terms of locations and stuff. You're gonna, many times you'll insist it's not that, but it is that. And so, that's useful. That's useful stuff. It's useful stuff for just living your life and whatnot. Downside, you're fundamentally always feeding separation and creating suffering and limitation on some level. You just are. There isn't really a good way around that, right? It might be getting more and more and more and more subtle. You might have to really, really look for it, but it's there. If you're in type 1, it's there. For type 2, leads to a radical elimination of separation, right? And a lot of the magical benefits, that's the stuff of legend, it's type 2 type stuff. And so you have people that are, getting closer and closer to this. You want to know how if you're getting closer and closer to type 2, how much of that magical stuff is happening for you? Frankly, it's pretty simple. If it's not, if stuff just isn't like manifesting like freaking crazy, highly improbable stuff, even, right away, all that stuff, you're not anywhere near type 2. You can be very good with charmed life. You can have a very flowy life, lots of, seeming really, that's different. It's a very different and interesting kind of experience and existence and life, if you will. But the downside is it's a very different life that is unappealing, probably, to many, many people. And I mean, very different life. You don't feel like you are, how can you feel like you're a part of the human race when it's the overall system that is just acting? I mean, there isn't anything left except for the system to act. That's very different. You don't feel connected to humanity in any way, shape, or form, right? Nor do you want to be. So, is type 1 or type 2 the real type of fundamental well-being? As I think I mentioned earlier, not in this section, so it won't be on this video for people. But we really have been through the ringer on this over the years, right? I remember when we first released the continuum, nobody'd seen the continuum before, and I got all of this, I want to say hate mail, but not love mail, from previous research subjects, who are location 4 people who are like, how could you possibly call location 3 people that have emotion, enlightened, or location 2 people or whatever else, right? The location 2 people were ragging on location 1. That should never be called enlightenment, right? I mean, it's just like an endless torrent of that type of stuff. Like everybody's so concerned, right, about what the real quote unquote enlightenment is. It's just kind of comical to us at this point. There's all kinds of different experiences. It's a choose your own adventure here, and it's, don't assume yours is better than the next person's, for crying out loud. It's not any better or any worse than the next person. So I would just encourage you to be careful of these types of thoughts. But, it's something that you definitely want to ask, and it's okay to ask, is which one is right for you? I've had to answer this for me. Other people that we work with have had to answer it for them. You have to answer it for you, right? Okay. Who's got questions? You can raise your hand if you want to ask them on video, and I'll just go through the hands. Or if there aren't any, that's fine too. Okay, Fernando, one of my favorite names.
Hey, Jeffrey.
Hi.
Thank you for everything you've shared. Tremendously helpful. And I'm wondering about the type 1, type 2. Is it a binary thing, or could there be a spectrum within type 1 through 2 as a,
It is more or less a
1.5?
binary thing, but you can take
Okay.
advantage of the aspects of, what might be done to get to to get to type 2, to advance your type 1, right? And to jump you over sections of the continuum, and, stuff like that. And, really, in terms of accessible tools and technologies, obviously the best thing is to be in one of those lucky situations where you've been identified as someone with a crap ton of talent, and you've got people that have already gotten there that are helping you periodically, not all the time, but coming out at appropriate intervals to give you like the next thing that will really make a difference, and you're supported by a system so you don't have to work every day or whatever, right? I mean, that's the ideal. It's unlikely for people in the West. And so down from that, it's really the type of thing that Karen was talking about, which is it's developing ridiculously good introspection skills, so that you can really get underneath stuff, and you can totally do it. We've had lots of people in our community that have of research participants who have obviously done this quite well. Some of them have, I'm sure, natural talent. Probably Karen is one of those people that has a lot of natural talent in that area. And in the terms of the research project, Annemiek is someone who has it's like she came out of the womb with 100% ability to do that or something. It's crazy. And then she's just layered on skills since she's been alive, effectively, in that direction, right? But you don't have to be that kind of she's 100% rock star, right? You don't have to be that kind of a rock star. I'm not, right? I didn't have, for most of my life, I wasn't working on this or thinking about this or having any inclination of this or whatever, right? It's a skill that I've had to realize is important, first of all, and then start to tiptoe in the direction of, and then get better and better and better at over time. When I first started to realize that this was a thing, I was extraordinarily good at describing other people's experiences and had absolutely no visibility, relatively speaking, into my own interior experience. I was a great scientist in the phenomenological and sort of, psychology in whatever ways. And that's what I'd spent a lot of time building skill in. And it never occurred to me that it might be useful to see that inside myself at that same level of detail. And I think I'm still, I'm nowhere near someone like Annemiek's skill level, but I'm good enough, and we've had a lot of people, I think, in the community that are good enough to sort of make progress in this type of direction. So it's first being able to get to that place, get to that recognition. And then it's second, what do you do with that once you see it? One of the things that it really brings out is just how illusory just about everything is that we consider real. And once you see things as illusory, you can't unsee them, right? And so, like, there was a time when you might have believed in Santa Claus, right? Or something like that, right? And Santa Claus was super real. You had to go to bed at a certain time. He's going to come down the chimney and give you presents, and then, as an adult, you're not like, no, I'm sorry, it's 8 o'clock. I'd really love to hang out with you more, but it's Christmas Eve. If I don't go to bed right now, there's not going to be any presents for me under the tree because Santa's going to skip my house, right? You just can't unsee it, right? You can't unlearn it. And that's what it's like. It's a process of seeing through very deep things like this. And sometimes it reconfigures them into other things that then you have to see through. Sometimes it destroys those things. Sometimes they remain in place, but your system will just never take them serious again. There's different ways, basically, that can show up, but that is the fundamental process. And so really direct inquiry is, that type of idea, not who am I version of it, right? But really getting that visibility in, and then using extensive analysis and questioning processes and whatnot, at very deep things, attentional level system things, and, really super deep level type things. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let's see, I had him full screen, so I don't necessarily know who was next. Let's just go in order of my screen. So Melissa.
Hi, Jeffrey. I'm just like really excited to hear you talk about the type 2 because when I was in childhood, I was noticing my system attaching to things, and then I was very instinctively just working to deconstruct them because it didn't make any sense to have them. Later, I had to kind of conform to being a normal person because Dad was pushing me out the door and I had to make a living. But but it never made any sense to me to watch these constructs form and then like, why would I want to hang on to them, or why would anyone around me want to hang on to them? But I just learned not to talk about it with people because nobody seemed to understand what I was talking about. So now what I'm wanting to know is like who in the community, because I've been doing this by myself basically, and so how can those of us that are exploring in this way connect?
Mhm. Totally. And so as a part of this video, in this video chat today, Anna Meek basically has said that, anyone who's really serious in this direction, can feel free to get in touch with her. And along those lines, also anyone who thinks they're having some of those later location experiences, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, maybe, that type of thing, they're also welcome. Really to get in touch with her. And so that's the answer. You can just sort of get a superstar to at least get some initial eyeballs on it. And we can probably from there tell who's serious about it and maybe get people together around that as well, in the same way that we've done internally.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. It's great to see you. Okay, Lisa.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi.
Hi. So curious to know, so do type 2 people, do their systems still do seek a fixed reference point, or that also goes away?
That seems to go away. Yeah, in their system. Mm-hmm.
So
And that's a big deal.
yeah, so you could actually feel at rest. Because what I do see with all of us finders that we're still seeking. We get to a location, it does feel like we've stopped and we come to rest, but then sooner or later you pick up the ball and you keep going. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that for them for a very long period of time, that doesn't repeat. That doesn't come up. It's not like, well, for the first 10 years I felt at rest and then whatever else. But they would also not say that there's anything there to feel at rest, not feel at rest. It's just so it's one of those things too. But yes, exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why when we're on the type 1 side of the fence, we feel that. It's not just that we still have the proclivities to the ego structure stuff that comes through and is visible to others and makes it very easy for us to discern from a research standpoint, things like that. But it's also that why are people still pursuing another location? How come? This is why. Yeah. Thank you. It's great to see you. Karen, who I've been picking on like crazy today.
I haven't felt picked on. I felt included.
I'm just kidding.
I'm joking back. Two questions I have. One is, would you say that drop in fixation is what is more broadly called non-duality? That, like where Angelo's going to talk about the permanent shift, that place where the I really dropped out in me about 9 months ago in a significantly new way, that there's just nothing anymore. And I don't know if the word non-duality applies. I don't have vocabulary for things.
We would have to have a much longer conversation, I think, in order for me to get any frame of reference for where you're at the moment.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. My initial thing is, well, yes and no. There's plenty of different ways. There's plenty of different non-duality.
Right.
out there.
Right. Like
Um,
there's flat and flat and flat, and there's non-dual, 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 there's self and no self and no self and no self.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's hard,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
very hard. And the other question is, are there some small groups around that let people come and visit?
No, which is why I think it's a good thing we'll see who's interested, sort of from our own crowd here.
Oh, there's a lot
And
of interest. A
take
lot
some.
of interest.
Yeah, it's
And
surprising.
It's
So,
you've missed it the last 3 or 4 months or so. It's just nuclear blossomed. And it's gone huge very
okay, cool.
recently. Yeah. The other thing I'll say in that whole pain and pleasure thing, with with my Ehlers-Danlos, I've been in pain my whole life. 24/7 since 2010 with a car accident, really pain of 3, 4, 5, 6 all day, every day. And when that pain pleasure dropped, I'm off all my meds. I'm off all of everything. It's just gone. So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
when it shifts, it's just totally different. Yes.
Yeah, it's, at the risk of sounding too crazy or whatever, or unscientific or whatever, it really does all seem completely imaginary.
Yeah, totally. There's nothing. Yeah.
It's crazy to the rest of the world until you're experiencing it.
Well, we should talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, we totally should.
I have no way to get a hold of you, but
Anime.
you have all of my data.
No, I think you probably have my email address.
I do not. I do not have your email address. You have mine. Send me yours. You have all my data.
Anime's listening, so she'll look it all up.
Okay.
It's great to see you. Thanks for everything. Okay, Quincy. Yep, unmute, of course.
I think Colette was ahead of me, but I have a very quick question.
Okay.
So where's the path of humanity in type 2? And before you answer, I want to say thank you very much for doing this. We have kind of wondered what happened to the very scarce Dr. Jeffery Martin, who we hadn't seen for quite a while, and now it's becoming a little clearer where he has disappeared to, and I forgive you.
Well, you guys have been left in better hands than mine, I think. Anamika's remained very engaged in there, and she's amazing. If that wasn't the case, it'd be probably a different story from me interacting with. Yeah, it's a good question. I guess one would say irrelevant, probably more than anything else. In the sense that a lot of what we consider fundamental well-being and the locations and stuff like that sort of collapses like the stool with its legs cut out from underneath it. When you take away its underlying support structures, and just sort of ceases to become a relevant topic. It's a very different direction, and quite a different thing, which is why we think of it as a separate type, literally a separate type, not a, we've added a lot of stuff onto the concept of PNSE and fundamental well-being, right? It's got a little triangle now. It's got the inside of the triangle. It's got the environment coming from the outside. It's like we just sort of kept expanding that concept from an explanatory perspective. But this, if people who are sort of pursuing this direction, they're not generally working their way through the continuum in the way that we think about it, or work through it. They're trying to kick the legs out from underneath the whole thing from some degree.
So this sounds to me like a little bit like how an extraterrestrial might be looking at humanity.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a non-human way of looking at humanity.
Yeah.
By the time you're on the other side of it.
That explains a lot. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks. Okay, Colette. Hi, by the way.
Jeffrey. First of all, I'm really surprised at the reaction I'm having to this. There's almost a fear reaction because this doesn't seem like a voluntary choice. It seems like this is what's happening, and I've been fighting it pretty tooth and nail. Yeah. I'm kind of speechless. I don't know what to say, but there is such a growing hollowness with the external, and you know, attempt and reattempt at trying to engage it with just more hollowness, and it seems like the aperture has completely, you know, turned inside itself. So the most comforting thing you've said is that there are others. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say, but yeah, thank you. Thanks.
I would say check in with Annemiek and, you know, descriptions like that, I can easily place within realms of type 1. And so, you know, it'd probably be a good idea to just have a conversation with Annemiek that's a little more in depth and see what she thinks about, you know, where you might be at and whatnot, before just assuming that that's the process you're falling into, because there could be a whole other section of the map, so to speak, that you're actually in, and that processes and useful knowledge about that, things like that. It's definitely, you know, I've definitely heard that exact same description many times relating to aspects of sort of the type 1 matrix type of stuff. So,
Yeah,
and it's fine either way, and I understand the fear. I definitely understand the sense of fear. It's like a gravity well sort of pulling you in. Feels probably like you're sort of scratching at the edges, trying to get not sucked down the hole. Plenty of people have experienced something similar to that, and it is very terrifying. And many of them do pull out and go back to earlier locations, just because it just feels like a better idea. And that's fine to do. It's also fine not to do it. Also depends to some degree on life circumstances. You know, your circumstances are good, so you can, you know, let go down the hole and it'd be fine. But yeah, I'd say, you know, drop a line to Annemiek. I should note Annemiek is going surfing for 20 days. So she won't be she's going to go to Australia, or she'll be in some kind of touch maybe for a week, but then she's going to be on like a boat in the middle of nowhere without probably a lot of connectivity. So I keep saying contact Annemiek, but if you guys are like, you know, I contacted her, and has anybody heard back from her? What's going on with this? Just, you know, she's out in paradise somewhere on her.
She's been very helpful already. So yeah, much gratitude to both of you. Thank you.
All right, cool. Okay, Jonathan.
Hey, Jeffrey,
Hi.
good to see you.
Good to see you too.
A lot of people in the community have kind of coalesced around really all you got to do is sink in, and a lot of great stuff on POK about that. Are you saying that really is always a type 1, or can that eventually lead to type 2, or it's really to just get deeper into type 1 type stuff?
It's really primarily to get into type 1 type stuff. It's not that I mean, I don't know anyone that's ever used it for type 2. But again, the number of people that we know that actually have experienced type 2 is vanishingly small. It's very common for people to think they are as they go deeper and deeper into type 1. But I mean, you really needed a very extreme, you know, if you're like in regular communication with other people, and like, no matter how much you might feel like you're in type 2, you're not in type 2, right? If you're out there as a teacher, interacting with people and whatever, no matter how much you might think you're in type 2, you're not in type 2, right? It's its own thing, right? And so, no, I don't think there's any real examples that we have of people using the type 1 type of methods, syncing in and stuff like that, to reach type 2. What is, very much the case from that is that as you do go deeper, if you will view, and this is where I think it's relevant more to our community, and why I'm doing the, why I'm talking about it even today, because it's just generally not relevant to people. As you go deeper into the matrix, and even just starting out in the matrix, this is true. So even if someone was just even at location 2 or something, it's a useful thought. But it's especially true the further you go. The more you can use what you gained there to turn your attention to these underlying structures, these underlying sort of support structures of separation, for lack of a better way of saying it, or the perception, the perspective of separation, because there isn't really separation, right? So it's a perspective of separation. The more you can turn your attention in those directions, even though it will not, in all likelihood, barring some major miracle or something, shift you over to type 2, it can still really accelerate things. It can save you a lot of time if your goal is to just really pedal to the metal, go as far as you kind of can from a type 1 fundamental well-being standpoint. It can cut off huge sections of the road ahead. As an example, it can clean up all kinds of things from the road behind that you didn't even know needed cleaning up. There's all kinds of benefits to it. And so, as I've sort of learned from the research team, that people are becoming more and more interested in sort of later location stuff, even though we don't necessarily, I think our team doesn't necessarily think that people are maybe getting to where they're at, where we would think they were at location-wise or whatever, right? Nonetheless, there's a lot of interest in that direction. There's a lot of going in that direction. There's a lot of whatnot. And there's a huge benefit of using any gains made in that direction for this, instead of continuing to do what you would normally do, right? With sinking into, let's say you're going from location 9 to location 10, right? And you've got a sense of there's this non-reality thing, or that things aren't real. And so you're sinking into the non-reality or whatever. If at location 9, even just you use the power and the capabilities that you have at location 9, instead of to just sort of sink into the non-reality thing and sort of continue on the standard type 1 direction, but to instead really sharpen your ability to actually view what's going on underneath all of that. And, just start trying to weaken those underlying support structures around things like attention and whatever else. You can just skip the entire next section of the continuum, right? If you do that well enough. Why go through it? You're only going through it because you're taking like the sort of kitty wheels path, right? And that kitty wheels path is very intense and it's hard to get to, and it's not like it's like not a big deal. It is a big deal, and people who get there, I think, should be applauded for it if that's what they want, and all of that. But lots of people in our research skipped huge chunks of the continuum, and so part of that is an orientation that one can have that really picks up steam in later locations and really picks up effectiveness. You can have this orientation at location 2, and maybe you're a person that could work really well for, but the odds are long, right? But by the time you've made it through a lot of locations and you've had a lot of reconfiguration, a lot of scrubbing clean, you've had a lot of your underlying belief systems about reality flushed and all of that, no matter who you are, you're kind of in a better situation to turn your attention more in these types of directions. And you can just, you can make a lot more progress, even though it's not a jumping over to type 2. Nonetheless, it's a tremendous benefit,
Mm-hmm. One more question. You mentioned that people that do this often around them are displayed magical abilities. You know, I was a psychic studies major at UC Santa Barbara, and it was always hard to get people like this that would demonstrate that. But it seems like it would be a real boon for scientific study of humans if some of these people could be studied and validated. And it seems like that hasn't happened in the scientific community. And is that possible? And do you think it's a good thing to try to do that?
Well, if you get there and you're willing to participate in those studies, I think that'll be great. You know, that would be very unusual. Because, you know, the last thing you want in these places is somebody beating a path to your door, or having any idea who you are, or putting yourself in any situation where people are in any way interested in you. You know, you're already dealing with it enough if you're in a tradition, with your tradition and your sect and your tradition that know about you and whatever else, right? That's useful because they're supporting you, you know, socioeconomically and stuff, right? But you really do not want any attention. You don't want people directing attention in your direction. There's absolutely no reason I think you will find that you would do that when you get to that place. But if you're different than that, that'll be awesome. You know, give us first digs.
I'll let you know if I get there.
All right, awesome. Okay. Don.
Hey, Jeffrey, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you.
So I don't even know if I have language for this, but there's a synchronicity here with you doing this presentation. And within the past week or two, something, again, not the words, the bottom fell out of something. It didn't change anything or everything, babbling. But, well, I'll preface it with saying that, you know, I've been, I'm profoundly grateful for what fundamental well-being is, for what you're doing, for the relief that it brings into people's lives that is just incredible. And at the same time, being a part of the fundamental well-being community, if I am, the fact that I continually see people reaching for more, grasping for more, the seeking, I got to get to that location, has just been such a, it's like, yeah, that's, and it's not, I don't pretend that I'm not seeking for things still, that I notice that, but I'm not interested. And that doesn't mean I don't like these people. I'm not totally behind what they're doing. And in the past couple of weeks, something opened up where I was able to see that everything I'm doing, I mean, every little thing that seems to be nothing is still a part of the conditioning that's happening here. And that conditioning rises up out of a well of I'm separate, I'm unworthy, I'm lacking, I'm unlovable, all of that stuff. And I mean, the way that I see it, we're all breathing that in the air here on the planet, because this has been here for a long time, you know. And so to pretend that I'm going to go through some program that's going to totally wipe that out or whatever. And, you know, and I've been around the spiritual block a few times. In a way, I was just being shown how ludicrous it is. And I don't want to say nobody on the planet, but it's like, yeah, nobody. And the East has their way of going after things of, yes, we're going to transcend this, the ego, the separation, whatever. And so there is this pressure applied to it, which is acknowledging, for me, I think in general, the truth of it, of that underlying flaw, and how we're going to get beyond that. And in the West, it's more so the flaw is there, but you know, we're going to overcome that. We're going to use it. We're going to improve ourselves. And that's all fine. Those things have yielded incredible things here on the planet. And yet still at base, there is something here about these schools of the ego improving the ego. And it's some pretty cool shit to do that. I mean, you're acknowledging that. And there's just been something in me that's like, oh my God, I could say it's overwhelming. It's not, there's not a sense of any bodily overwhelm, but the observation of it is like, fuck, you know, what do I do with this? And the answer is I can't do anything with it. The only thing that has arisen for me is observation and recognition on its own without and noticing that oh yeah, and I'm resisting it there. Oh yeah, I'm trying to manipulate it there. And again, noticing that. That's all I know. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
All right.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there to see, right? Everywhere. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things people can, I think, be very disappointed. You know, especially now that in the community, we probably have people that are going further and further. And I think they sort of assume, oh, wow, when they reach, you know, this point, they'll be totally different. And now they're sort of like, hey, how come, like, even there? You know, I went through that same disillusion with the research a long time ago. You know, obviously, we were researching people further and further out, right? And I'm like, wow, you know, there's still an enormous amount of ego here, sort of, you know, what's going on here with this guy? He's like way out there, but, and it was like, it was hard for me really, because I'm like, crap, I've, you know, we're dedicating all this time and all this research to, you know, how come this is still, so yeah, I mean, that's why this call, you know, this workshop or whatever you want to call it today, really just feels very timely from what I can tell. I'm guessing it's sort of where the community is at, of course. I'm not reading it or whatever else, just picking it up from the research reports and stuff. And the questions I'm asked and things by the research team. But it seems like it's probably that moment, you know, where people are just going to be noticing this among these people. And so it's good to cover, I think, and good to just know that this just keeps staying with, and you keep getting more and more blind to it as well. If you're not aware of it, if you're not calling other people out on it or whatever else, you just, you know, your blindness level to it keeps getting more and more. And then you know, lots of times, like the first people who experience something, they sort of, everybody's looking to them, you know. Annemiek had this her whole life, right? Where like here, she's like this young person and she's talking like this sage from, you know, like 1,000-year-old sage from India or whatever. And she talks about how, you know, everybody just maps onto her, oh my God, you're like that and you're so young, you must be the most advanced being ever. And people are just like, you know, and it's just going to happen, right? Probably the first people that experience stuff in any community, they're going to be like, oh, that person has figured it out. What can we learn from them, right? And then you discover, wow, they seem not like they always seemed, or, you know, how come this didn't, whatever. And there's just disillusionment that can kind of come in. And so I think it's helpful to have an explanation for what's really going on there and what one can do about it as well, if they choose to, or acceptance around it if they don't choose to, or, you know, all that. Does that make sense? All right. It's good to see you. Catherine.
Hey, thank you so much.
Hey.
A question this is amazing. And once with your help and Annemiek's help, moved out of 4 and back down, and then started kind of going probably all over the place. It became so evident that there was so much still going on that was not accessible to the system at a particular time or in a particular place. And I think there's sort of a maybe practical question here of what might help as we're going through this or seeking to continue to inquire at what feels like this sort of thing that Annemiek and I had talked about, where it's like, what's under this? And there'd been this, I don't know, feeling of it in the system or arising of it in the system, and but sort of an opaqueness perhaps to it. But sorry, I know this probably isn't even making sense. So what helps to see what's just not visible, to inquire where to the places that aren't describable or touchable, and how I'm about to get tears. How do we go about that, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very significant time commitment. And I think one of the things is that at a certain point, you begin to think, okay, let's see, in this period of my day that I've got to do some meditation, I can do some sinking in, or I can do some kind of cleanup in my system from a mental and emotional standpoint, right? Or I could do some more charmed life type stuff because I would really like whatever to occur. Or we start to build up, these different options, these different menu items, essentially. Now, this is another menu item, right, which is an extremely deep recursive inquiry into this type of stuff. And it's just looking again and 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 just, whereas before you might have been like, okay, well, let's see what's inside. Oh, there's some sadness. Well, let's get to the bottom of the sadness. And it's, that's still at a layer of the mental emotional, right? And so it's developing the skill to sort of see what is the mechanism that is even able to produce sadness in the system. Right? Or what is the mechanism that directed the attention to sadness in the first place? And so it's these very, very low level, initially perceptual seeming type things. And the only way to do that is just with a lot of time and ignoring all the other stuff that you would normally do during a session, right? And just trusting that, though this is, I'm going to choose, just like in a normal situation, you might choose, I'm going to sink in instead of deal with the emotional thing. I could use Sanjay's method to deal with this identity thing, but instead I'm just going to sink in, or I'm going to use Sanjay's thing instead of sinking in, or, it's always sort of making a choice. In this case, it's making an additional choice that hasn't really necessarily been talked about as much before, which is I'm just going to ignore everything kind of that comes up. I'm not going to sink in. I'm not going to address any identity or any mental and emotional conditioning or any, anything. I'm just going to just keep looking for what is underpinning the presentation of what seems to be existence to me in this moment to the, until I find it. And it's hard. Especially initially, because your system has spent its entire life ignoring it and orienting to other aspects. And we've all been through this just in our progression in fundamental well-being, where it took a lot of time to teach attention to look at this instead of this other thing. That it's always been there. It's just been ignoring it the whole time. And so this is even worse, right? Because like this perceptual stuff, it was probably like when we were out of the womb or something. Before it started to get covered over, like in the first hour or something of being out of, God only knows how, long we've been ignoring this stuff or how much stuff is popping. So it's really challenging and it's very time consuming. And you have to go in that direction, which is a very different direction than every other direction that you go in, even from a fundamental well-being standpoint. Does that make sense?
Completely. And it almost doesn't feel like a choice.
Yeah. Sure. But you'll, on any given day, you might decide, well, no, for my own quality of life, I'm going to choose to do this, not this other thing. Or whatever. And I think we have to give ourselves permission, to do that as well. I see a lot of people that sort of go in this direction that beat themselves up. Or, I should have really just spent today, but I just, I tried and I just couldn't. And they wind up extremely frustrated. And then, well, at least I'm going to release some of the frustration, so that when I get out of the session, my rest of my day won't be ruined or whatever else. But it's really common to try to go in these directions with focused meditation type stuff and just fail, and come out of an hour or two or three of trying and just be like, I'm just incapable. And just feel horrible as a result of it. And so it's, it's a thing. It's a challenge to really, and even super experienced people that have been good at it for decades, it can still, because you're always working on the next thing, you know, and they can go through periods of months and months and months where it just feels like they've reached the level where finally they've exceeded their capability, right? And they'll be unhappy and, you know, literally, and even though they're in deep in PNSE, right? I mean, it'll really be hitting them at a deep emotional level, you could even really say. You know, they're not happy people in those times, really. We're working on something so deep. But then now the skies part, right? And so, you know, more or less, I just know to ignore them when they're like that, because I know that eventually the day is going to come and they're going to be like, oh, you know, it all worked out. And, you know, I try to appear empathetic, but I know they're just in a rut, and these things happen. And so you can expect those to, this is heavy lifting. It's not it's not the happy, fun, you know, everything is, you know,
Charm life.
light, and it's all joy and peace and love, and it's all just this pervasive field, and oh, it's amazing. And, you know, it's like not that. This is a whole different thing.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Good seeing you.
Okay, Bo.
Hi, Jeffrey. Well,
Hi.
that's very exciting, the type 1, type 2. I learned 2 markers. Is that correct? That on one side, there happens a lot of magic in type 2 and synchronicity. And the second, that you experience yourself more a cosmic being than a human being. Is that right?
Definitely don't experience yourself, I think, was how I
yeah.
probably.
Okay. But you talked about not belonging to humanity anymore. So let's formulate it this way. And I was wondering, is there a connection with releasing trauma? So if you're ready to really go deep into trauma release, that you shift over to type 2, and if you're searching for a way to optimize in hiding trauma, that you are then sticking to type 1?
A lot of the paths that traditions will use on the type 2 side of the fence are actually highly trauma inducing. And so I don't think that from that, I've, you know, thought about that question myself. It does not seem like there's a clearing out of trauma that's necessarily happening, at least not in those examples, right? And so I don't think that trauma has much to do with the type 2 side of the fence, except that it might be really useful in certain forms of it, done in kind of ritualish ways, to help someone to get there, ironically. Now, one of the things that I think, more broadly speaking than that, as one is working their way through the type 1 side of the fence, even people who had great childhoods and, you know, haven't had significant trauma to work through and things like that. One thing that I think Stan Groff found that seems accurate to us is that nearly everyone seems to hit birth trauma eventually. It's almost like that birth trauma thing is a very key chunk of the instantiation of separation in the system. And so as you're working your way through the later locations and stuff, that is an almost unavoidable piece of trauma to, in terms of, you just kind of have to resolve it. And I think it's interesting, you know, because I don't think Stan, who I knew, was frankly all that into fundamental well-being. And he wasn't into scientific research either, you know, not for the majority of his life. And so his breath work and stuff, he'd never really done any significant research on it from a scientific standpoint or whatever else. And so he was going off a lot of intuition and observation of people over time and versus structured processes of inquiry and stuff like that. But I think he really hit on something quite powerful with that birth trauma thing, and in being able to sort of reprogram that in people, he was able to see it just resolve so much stuff that was sitting on top of it in their lives. And in more recent years, I've seen that same thing from a late location, very kind of late location, fundamental well-being type of thing, where people will eventually hit the birth trauma, however it's showing up for them, you know, and there's manifests in all kinds of different ways, but they will eventually hit it. And that particular piece of trauma does seem to be very significant to clear for at least progression from a type 1 standpoint.
So even within type 1 to get further hit the locations.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to clear that out. Now, what's interesting is that it seems to hit different people at different points.
Mm-hmm.
And so it might hit someone earlier in a location than a later location.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff like that. And, you know, there's not quite enough science in that area for us to really know what might be happening there. So, you know, at the top of your head, you could speculate that it's something like, you know, just the trauma went in differently, different layers of the system, different degrees of the system affected. Some people, it might be a more shallow layer than a more, you know, might extend to a more shallow layer. You might hit it sooner than someone else who had stayed at a deeper layer, didn't affect as much. I mean, it could be something like that, but we really don't have any idea. That's just a total wild ass, you know, comment. But what is the case is that it does seem to be hit, and it does seem to be very significant to the separation stuff. And if we think about the location 1, or I'm sorry, the type 1 separation stuff, type 1 is, I mean, type 2, of course, also, it all relates to separation. But speaking just about type 1 for a minute, type 1, that is a pathway to non-separation. I mean, that's all it is. It's a systematic pathway to non-separation. And you're just getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And you're peeling off one layer of separation after another layer of separation after another layer of separation. And that birth thing sits so powerfully and so deeply in the system in terms of separation that just people hit it sooner or later.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you. All right, Lisa, again, hi.
Hi. Well, maybe you just answered it, because I was curious as to, so the perception of separation is basically an illusion, and yet we're all stuck in it mostly, and humanity's been on this huge, long millennia path of separation and individuation, and just going deeper and deeper into that. And I was wanting to know if you had any thoughts as to why, but you just referenced the birth trauma, and that's an experience we all have when we come here to this plane of existence. So that perhaps sets us up right there for why all the separation, which is not actually real, but that's how we get here, is by becoming separate. So maybe you just answered it for me.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I have a really good answer from an existential wider clue to that, you know. We just have indications in the data of directionality, you know? Thanks. Don.
Of all the non-physical deaths that happen throughout life, would you say that this transition to, or this deepening, or whatever you want to call it, arrival at type 2, is that the biggest non-physical death that you're aware of? Because some death clearly happens there.
Yes, I would say so from our data.
Okay.
At least. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank
you. All right, Jonathan, You guys are taking turns. You're playing so well with others. I don't know. Clearly, you're in location 19 now, Jonathan. Everyone
it
is.
must
It's so
be
amazing, bro.
a deep
That's-
personality flaw is hopefully changing. You mentioned birth trauma, and what, if anything, has helped people to work on that, deal with that? It's a nonverbal thing, so I've tried to work on that a little bit with MDMA with folks or holotropic
Yeah.
breath work. I'm wondering what your sense is.
Yeah, it's the stuff that you're thinking. It's, the holotropic stuff actually has had an impact on quite a few people. Drugs, and a lot of the other sort of non-physical or non-conceptual type of therapies that make people feel very supported, and that allow sort of deeper things to increasingly come up over the course of sessions.
Mhm.
Body-centered type of supporting type things. Even like the people who just, you go and they hug you with the biggest motherly energy in the world for, you do enough of that, seems like people get there to the birth stuff. Which kind of makes sense. That would have been the first person now that I think about it. I never thought about it before, really, but of course you're in your mom's arms right after that or whatever, right? So not a surprise that that's their whole vibe. But it's there's not much of it, Mostly people wind up just trying to deal with it, chip away at it from different angles with different techniques that they've got and that they've used for other stuff.
Okay,
I think it's
thank
hard to even know when it's gone, or when it's going to rear its head again, or because it's so deep. It's one of those things,
you. Thanks.
Yeah. Boris, good to see you, Boris.
Hey, Jeffrey.
Hey.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that type 1 is sort of a continuum of decreased separation or increased non-separation, something like that. So are you suggesting that type 2 is not in that direction, or doesn't have
Type 2
anything
is
to
the
do with
most
that?
radical expression of that imaginable. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Just want to clear that up.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Okay. Well, it's almost 11. But let's do this. I'm going to stop the recording and restart it.